moments before an election, a judge deciding not to release certain stuff because they're, you know, worried about the impact it could have, and I'm referring to the Bonnie Jimenez Asano letter. The federal court judge said, you know, I think the day before the poll voting, right, that he wasn't going to release this letter that she allegedly wrote to UCSD on behalf, oh no, did write, we have the letter now. But he wasn't going to release it because he was worried about the impact that it might have on the campaign. And I do think that the conversation needs to be had about whether that's acceptable as a legal argument with the judges, like maybe even write, you know, maybe your organization, SPJ, or we could like collectively write a letter or something to the judges' organization or something, because, you know, that's probably not a decision that a judge needs to be worrying about. They just need to rule on, is this a public record or is it not? And from my perspective, the moment that the police and the district attorney said, we're not pressing charges, you know, charges aren't going to be filed here, their investigation is over, and those search warrants are public record. So, you know, we were trying to get them all week long, and I do think that that's a conversation to be had with authorities.
How do you guys think the search warrants would have affected your campaigns if those details had been public?
I think it would have depended on the coverage. I personally, I don't think it. I think that I believe that these two guys, both Bosnich and Harper, I believe they were telling the truth. I don't have any physical evidence. It's a gut sense that I have just based on a whole variety of factors. And there's nothing that came out in that search warrant that changed my opinion. But to a large extent, I'm not even in a position. I mean, sort of how this may or may not have affected this campaign, I think it's a question that the journalists in this room probably have a better, handle.
I mean, it was your campaign. How do you think those details would have Marianne meeting Bosnich person?
Well, look, we would have gotten all the questions that we've been getting post-campaign, we would have gotten pre-campaign, and what we would have said then is the same thing we're saying now, that, sort of this whole delay in turning it over, there was nothing nefarious about it. It wasn't like we spent 4 days poring over these documents and studying them and drawing up. They sat in a folder on somebody's coffee table unopened for 4 days. So that rather than sort of having it being turned over 24 hours after we got them, whatever, it was 4 days, but it was 4 days that it said, they sat on a table gathering dust. And as for Marion's decision to photocopy it, again, the point I made earlier today was that she had absolutely no reason to believe at the time these were stolen documents, because the public record at that point indicated that nothing had been stolen. And quite frankly, I still don't believe they were stolen documents.
Wasn't it just direct mail pieces? Is
right? They were draft direct. Exactly. They were draft direct mail pieces. I mean, they were sort of draft pieces that DeMaio was sort of testing out. Messages like, Scott Peters is a bad rich guy. That kind of thing. Like, I mean, seriously. So it just did not have. Those documents just really did not have that much of an impact on our campaign, if any. I mean, and again, I never heard mention of them at all. Well, when I was on the campaign until this whole thing broke. So, but my point being is that had the search warrants been unsealed before the campaign ended, we would have dealt with all these questions that I'm being asked now. We would have been bombarded with these things and been forced to answer them before the election. And what impact that would have had on the voters, and I have no idea. I really don't. I mean, we have a very strong case to make that I don't believe we did anything wrong. I maintain that. I would have maintained that then. I maintain that now, and we would have had to make that case very aggressively, because clearly we would have gotten a lot of questions about it.
The search warrants that come out earlier, I really do, because the search warrants or the affidavits themselves bring into question the validity of the statements and the validity of the accusers. Mr. Bosnich was, along with Allison Rentschler, were two of the initial suspects in the break-in. The police did a search warrants on his place of residence, and some interesting things came to light as a result of that. Now that brings them into this mix of, you broke into the office, allegedly, and now you're making these claims after you were fired for plagiarism. It starts to raise questions. And what I'm getting at is the question about your sources. Well, I believe they're true. I talked to a guy on the phone. You don't want to go on camera. Okay, you don't want to go on camera. Well, why can't you just do a Skype just individually? Say, hey, just Skype me, show your ID, and we just put this entire issue to rest. No. Justin Harper would not. Unless there's another reporter that has actually seen a picture of him with ID or something like that.
We didn't ask him to do that, so it's not like he refused.
Okay, he
his family with his Navy.
The other thing I would say is that he and I communicated over Twitter. This Twitter account that you look back through the search history, it has a long history of tweets. So then that Twitter account would also have to be made up, and the emails between him and Tommy Nepper when he quit the campaign with the same email address that he's emailing me with, those would also have to be made up, I guess.
And to put it to rest, all you'd have to say is, just show me your ID. Just show me that you're really who you say you are.
Are you truly suggesting that the Justin Harper that gave the interview to him is not the real Justin Harper? Are you truly suggesting that?
I am.
Well, so then why wouldn't the real Justin Harper, whoever he is, just sort of come forward and say, hey, this guy's making stuff up about me?
Why wouldn't the real Justin Harper show hey, this is really me? And when asked by journalists,
Nobody asked him to.
I know that's not the case.
Dave, that's insane. That's crazy.
No, I don't think it is.
Dave, I will also say that you made this argument to us, and then we went back and did more checking just to be 100% sure, and then we gave you the opportunity to make that statement on the record, and you didn't. You made the statement about that the urinal was broken.
And it was. My point is that should journalists be running stories with questionable sources, with questionable statements, and questionable facts? It becomes only he said, she said, whatever it is. Instead, what journalists need to do is ask the hard questions.
Dave,
do not be punked.
If I could interrupt. Hard questions were asked. Various news organizations, including ours, were satisfied that this was the person that we were talking to was the person. Obviously not to your satisfaction.
No.
They've got the DNA test?
Alex, please, for a second. So, and I mean, as Claire said, that you did have an opportunity to challenge that further, and you didn't want to do that on the record. So, none of this will be put to rest, but we're all pretty satisfied. And to go to Alex's point, this guy, we were satisfied that he is who he is. He would sit there and learn about all this stuff being said by a fraudulent person and not somehow try to correct that. I just find that hard to believe as well. But I'd kind of like to move on.
I don't have questions to what ifs or hypotheticals, but I do wish, getting back to the original point, I do wish the search warrants had come out earlier. I do wish that they had been talked about, that they had been exposed, and that the information that was in those affidavits had been allowed to kind of promulgate into the
As someone who has some experience with search warrants, I'd like to bring up 2 points here about the search warrants. Number one is, in this group of professional journalists, it is an embarrassment in this town among the ownership of the media that we do not put forward the financial costs to get these warrants earlier. With Asano, we should have gone to federal court and asked that judge to release that letter. With Danielson on the warrants in this case, it's very possible that he wouldn't have released them, but you cannot, as a journalist, play the role of a lawyer. And when you do, you won't get the stuff. Number two is, I think that we have to be very careful in the way we use the affidavits of detectives in search warrants as if they are fact, vetted by a jury. They are simply the educated opinion of the detective about what he or she has learned in the case. And they are making an argument to the judge to grant the warrant. So they have some motive to, if not exaggerate, to put forward the facts that are going to be the most persuasive and to leave out those that aren't. And I think that we do our viewers and readers a bit of a disservice to present the detective's comments as fact.
Please. You have, so just for everyone's sake, it's 8:07.
I'm going to be very quick.
You can ask a question. Dave, what time do you have to leave here? Can you skip your flight?
My question is...
Yeah.
Point of fact, potatoes. Oh, now
You know what's
I need to be on a plane in 1 hour.
I'm Laura Wingard. Full disclosure, I think I've worked with everyone except you, Dave.
Well, until a Sunday morning at 7 a.m.
But you keep going back to this wasn't Justin Harper. Justin Harper worked for Carl DeMaio. Carl DeMaio has to send him a W-2 form. If he's not Justin Harper, produce the real Justin Harper.
That's not our responsibility. It's your responsibility as a journalist to ask the tough questions. I'm asking the question, and when I'm trying to
you can't deny it. You can't. If it wasn't him, you should have brought him forward. You can't do it.
Like I said, even just the phone number of the person that you had on your campaign, so we could compare.
Do I need to tell you how easy it is to spoof a phone number?
Oh.
I spent over 10 years in telecom. I managed large corporate telecom networks. I know how easy it is to spoof it.
But if you spoof a number, how can you call that number back and then Justin Harper answers the phone? You make the claim that the number is spoofed. If you call the number back and he answered the phone, how is that possible?
You do realize you're making an incredible accusation.
No,
right?
look, quite frankly, I mean, I used to be a reporter, and the lead on every story tomorrow should be, you know, DeMaio campaign now claims that the real Justin Harper is like faked or something. I mean, that's an astonishing assertion to make.
That was the assertion I made in speaking with Claire and with Laura. I said, is this the real Justin? And I still have not been convinced yet that the person that I was having to deal with through Claire and Laura was the real person. No one has really come to my satisfaction to say this person is really it.
So
if you want
will you produce the W-2? No, yes or no?
Everyone's an independent contractor on W-2s.
So will you produce the documentation? Yes or no?
With 1099.
How do you explain all the conspiracy theories? There's the Justin Harper, there's the email hacking, there's a lot of conspiracy theories that kind of, how do you explain that? I mean, because it seems like, you know, there should be one per story, but there's a lot of conspiracy theories.
Sure, it's a giant conspiracy to promote 3 smears over the course of a year and a half, whatever it was.
But
either that or it's actually true, one or the other.
And then there's
the emails, and this person didn't send it, or somebody else sent it, or he's not the real Justin Harper. There's always like sort of a conspiracy. That's how you respond to the allegations, is that there's some sort of conspiracy.
That 2 former staffers who were both fired are conspiring together to try to sink a congressional campaign. That's exactly what our
Justin fired.
Probably were.
Except for one might not exist. It might actually not be.
Look, I don't think we want to resolve this one, so let's move on here, you guys. I want to ask you guys, all of this, journalists and campaign people, which outlets covered this the best, which outlets covered this the worst?
Just remember our home court advantage. Be nice.
Security will escort you out of the building.
I thought it was a very this is a very tough. It was a tough campaign. I did not envy any reporter who had to cover this campaign. There were extraordinarily difficult judgment calls that had to be made. There were each call that you made was subject to second guessing. So I think by and large everybody did a fundamentally fair job. I had good working relationships with everybody. I respected the job everybody did. You know, obviously I have a huge problem with the UT's editorial page, but that's neither. You know, that has nothing to do with. I mean, Mike Smalls and I. No.
I'm kidding.
I mean, I had a very good relationship with Mike Smallins throughout this, and I would give him my honest feedback, and he would always be very prompt in responding, and Mark Walker the same. And I think with all the other reporters here who I dealt with, I think you guys all did a solid job, and again, I don't I did not envy the position you guys were in because it was a tough race to cover on a number of different levels. That's my thought.
At the risk of pissing off every single journalist in the room.
Don't worry about it.
Too late. You guys have an incredibly hard job to do. I realize that. And I also realize it's my job to ask questions. And it's my job to question facts that other people make in slandering, making slanderous accusations. I think at first I had a lot of trouble with some of the initial reporting. I did. What I do want to say, though, is that once these search warrants came out, that there was suddenly some questions about, perhaps if you want to say questions about both sides, you might think so, I couldn't possibly comment. My point is that it is interesting that after the election, or shortly thereafter, it kind of changed, the entire narrative changed, and it became more of a, wait, this doesn't make sense. This doesn't make sense. And also the reporters who asked those questions, this doesn't make sense, and it became less of a, oh, this happened, this is gospel, to, wait a second, maybe we should start asking these questions. Those are, I think, the aspiring, strong journalists, because it's about asking the questions. It's not about he said, she said, he said, he said. It's about asking the questions, about doing the investigations, doing the journalism. That's what makes journalists amazing.
Wait, so follow-up. So you said at the beginning, the initial reports you found faults with it. Which, why?
CNN liked to, there's a number of things wrong with the CNN report. We showed CNN a whole bunch of documents which pretty much flat out disprove Todd Bosnich's allegations.
Where are those documents? I asked you.
We shared them with selective media outlets.
But if they disprove these horrible smears, why wouldn't you show them to the public?
Because
to disprove these horrible smears.
The PR tactic involved in this is if I give out all sorts of different documents,
The truth.
Twitter is going to, and let me tell you, Twitter is going to spin around with a bat. Oh my gosh, this can't be right, this can't be right, and it's going to create 20,000 other stories. The object here was to give enough, which we believed was enough to make journalists question the issue. Say, this doesn't make sense. In retrospect, I guess it didn't work. But
the media strategy, and I would love to hear who Rick Grinnell is and what the media strategy
let's hold on a second. Let's answer.
Yeah.
So CNN is a problem. Anyone else?
yeah, I think CNN left out a couple key facts. They wanted to use, for instance, the Waso smear. Well, they conveniently left out the fact that that was pretty much disproven. It was salacious, but it was disproven. You mean Waso says that, two other people said this was the case? Oh, wait, except they didn't. Carl took a lie detector test, of which everyone loves to talk about lie detector tests, which is
But that's an old campaign, so do you
No, that's an important part, because the entire other two smears are based on the idea from the Waso smear that somehow Carl DeMaio is a sexual deviant. If the first one had not occurred, the other two would have seemed less plausible. But the people who made those accusations knew that that first accusation, the Waso smear, which no one in San Diego ran and had to be shopped around to an Orange County reporter. Credit to City Beat, even City Beat did not run it. My point is that A leads to B leads to C, and if people see, oh, there's a pattern here, well, obviously then that pattern must be true. It's not. You make a smear once, oh, well, the second time, oh, well, that must be the case. Oh, the third one, that must be the case. And the third story is even less plausible than the second, which is even less plausible than the first. It all unwinds, it all falls apart when you look at the facts. And the things that we have not seen is...
Why? Let me ask you this. If both Bosnich and Harper are making this up, why in the world would they do that? Why? And how do you explain sort of two former loyal DeMaio staffers getting to the place where not only, guys who looked at him like a hero, getting to the place where they wanted to do anything possible to bring him down, including making up allegations?
We fired Todd Bosnich for plagiarism.
Let's don't get sideways on this, you guys. Honestly, this is an issue that kind of tangential to journalism.
It has to be
Let's
on
pass
the
the mic
plate,
down to
whatever.
these three journalists and ask these guys who covered the race the best and who covered it the worst? And don't say yourselves.
Who covered it the best and who covered it the worst? Really? I agree with Alex that it was a very, very tricky campaign to cover, and I think a lot of journalists in town were very hardworking, very diligent, and maybe that remains to be seen who's covered it the best.
Well, I'll say what's on my mind, Matt. That's a total bullshit question. No, it's legitimate. Just the best and the worst. Let me mention one thing. There's a lot of reasons why the election may have turned out the way it did, and I know that Vince Vasquez doesn't put much credit on the accusations. He does his numbers and shows what Peters did well in how he won certain precincts and stuff. But where I'm heading, I'll jump to the. I really thought that Claire's story on Justin Harper was a very important and influential story in the way the race may have turned out. I thought it was very well reported, first of all. I thought it was a good story. We followed up on it. We talked with him. But if you look at the polls, and for once our polls seem to be in sync with what other polls were saying, that it was very close near the end. Some independents were starting to move into undecided before the second guy came up. But I'm just sort of thinking that if people were on the fence, that they kind of want to vote for Carl, there's this accusation, they don't know what to think, and then there's headlines saying a second staffer is making similar accusations. Even us in the media were sort of like, if there were just some corroboration with Bosnich, and that, I think, in some voters' minds might have been a factor. Did it win or lose the race? I can't say, but I just, in trying to get around your question but say something of substance, I really thought that was a big story. And yeah, I'm sure they talked about it. We talked about what we were going to do with it, were we even going to do it. We were going to just basically rewrite your story because we couldn't get a hold of Justin for a while, and then Mark Walker, bless his heart, got a hold of him late that night, and we did the story. And believe me, we had misgivings. The day before the election, here you've got that story. Anyway, Valerie.
I think media, especially in this town, everyone feeds off of each other, and someone does one story, and then someone else does another story from another outlet. I think it would be really difficult to say who's the best, who's the worst. So.
You want a job at PR?